My first question would be, obviously, Black History Month means a lot to, a lot of different people. Well, what does it mean to you? And in this time of life in 2023, how do you see us, properly honoring and celebrating Black History Month?
Yeah, no question. I mean, well, Black history certainly for me has meant a lot about reflection, just a time to look back and connect the dots about, whether personal history or also just the contributions to this great experiment that we call America, the opportunity to see people of all walks of life come together and recognize that although it is Black history, it's also American history, it's shared history. And I think of a people that had been through, one of the largest struggles you can imagine, right? You talk about an enslaved people that, went through hundreds of years of trying to figure out a window, an opportunity just to be part of this fabric and be able to have freedom. And once that was there, then it was a new type of rebuilding. It was a chance to start something new. And I think when you're loyal to a nation where at one point you were enslaved inside of or with or by, and still believe tremendously in what America can be, then I do think that that's a real powerful statement about your commitment and just the fact that I look at that history and see so much of the belief in America being upheld despite second class citizen, despite slavery, despite all these things, and still coming out and believing that this is where we want to be. And so that struggle is, to me, embodies America, right? It embodies what America can best stand for. When you think about the hope is still there, even in the face of such circumstances. And I think when you celebrate that, you're really celebrating this story and the aspirations of a more perfect union that constantly is challenged and being carved in a way by sometimes the most challenging circumstances. And so that personal story has been my walk. My dad from Trinidad and Tobago, and my mom growing up in North Carolina, came with very different perspectives on race. Given my dad came from a country that was, he always felt like, well, there's no ceiling for me because I look around in Trinidad, everybody's Black, everybody's, the commissioner of the police, they're running the country. He didn't see the limitations, where my mom had to find ways to navigate around that feeling because of segregation. She was like, well, we have our own. And yet together they came together and committed to a future that they felt they can be part of, and watch slowly the arms open a little bit wider of that inclusion. And so with baseball, I think they do a nice job. When I always think about some of the great figures, whether Jackie Robinson, and you always want to find the new stories because there's always something you can unearth. And that's in some ways part of the intrigue, to be able to find a new connection to Black history and baseball outside of just the established figures that we know were pioneers. And so the more we do that, I think the more you include more people and the more you recognize that our history is truly shared.
Who are some of those people that you looked up to coming up, like as an African American player, or mentors you had throughout your time playing, and even now?
I have to start with Jackie Robinson because I recall early on being familiar with his story, reading a biography about his life. And, my mom had an Afro-American Educational Center, as she called it, AAEC, on Saturdays. And for many decades, she, made sure that not only we learned about Black history, but the contributions in very pragmatic ways like SAT prep and computers. And it was very eye-opening to hear about inventors and pioneers and all the ways Black history was right under my nose. Whether I look at a light changing from red to green, or whether I'm looking at a filament and Lewis Latimer and others. So that story gives you a lot of pride. And I think they recognize that the self-esteem was important to know about your contribution as a people, where you're part of that. And so, although Jackie Robinson was that first, name that sort of came together around, it became many other stories. If I think about Gary Maddox, who I played for the Phillies, and he was someone that, as a fan, I loved as an outfielder, and became a mentor and talked to me about life after the game. All along the way, there were so many people, whether Sean Dunston, that passed down, the lessons, and recognizing there's something unique about a Black player communicating about the Black experience in baseball to try to make that path a little bit easier. So a lot of the mentors, although historic, whether Roberto Clemente, whether Jackie Robinson, or just personal from just my own personal story of baseball, they all carried tremendous weight to help me find my pathway and ultimately, fortunately, a career as well.
You talk about that pathway. Your mom's from Trinidad and Tobago. Or sorry, your mom's from North Carolina. Dad's from Trinidad and Tobago. Grew up in New Jersey. Went to Penn, and then became the first African American Ivy Leaguer to make the major leagues. Obviously, that's going from a lot of different areas and avenues, but holding that title is a pretty big deal. What does that mean to you?
Well, it meant, a whole lot. And I think part of it was, I think the key distinction of my, Ivy League story that I didn't even know until Will Venable got to the big leagues as the second Black Ivy Leaguer who graduated from an Ivy League school. And that was sort of like, whoa, wait a minute. And when I found out that he was second, I was like, wait a minute, I guess
that would mean I was first.
I kind of backed into but I think the first word you think about is pioneer. And it's not that I necessarily set out to, or, Will Venable set out to. He's like, hey, I'm a ball player. I love this. This is what I enjoy. And I just happen to be able to make it. I happen to get the chance to get to the top of this sport. And when you're in that position and you get that perspective, then you think about how you can help, how you can not be just first, second, but there could be third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. You just think that everyone should have the opportunity coming from wherever, and you see that because you had a unique path and maybe a rare path, that may give you a certain understanding or opportunity to share that story that was unique and sometimes uniquely challenging. But you come from somewhere, and you come from somewhere, in my case, the Caribbean, descendants of slavery, and a country where I wasn't, my dad was not even born in the United States, and just to kind of still believe in the possibility and still be able to share, like, wow, what are the chances, right? When you're able to be an immigrant in this country and, meet my mom and be able to chart this path. I think when you have that kind of story, there's a pride to it for sure, but it's also a grateful feeling of this. There's so many ways this couldn't have happened, right? That there's so many ways and obstacles that could have made this impossible. And I think that gives me a certain pause and an appreciation.
In the premiere episode of your Classes in Session, we spoke with Dusty Baker and Herm Edwards about the barriers for minority coaches in sports, and I kind of want to carry that into even like players or other people in sports today. Do you still see those problems arising, and what are kind of some of those, just that we can kind of highlight now with the focus on Black History Month?
Yeah, there's certainly always conversation and ways to improve just in terms of representation. Not to say it's whether on the field or but it's a lot to do with leadership and positions of power. Power is a big equalizer when you talk about opportunity and the decision to open certain doors. You have to be in that chair. You have to be in a position to make that change. And although with Sea League rules and many changes that baseball's tried to make, I think there's a lot of genuine effort to add representation, to still make sure, whether you're in the ticket office or whether you're in community relations or on the field, that you're seeing different faces, your different backgrounds, and really truly representative of all walks of life, because you want a game that is open to everyone. And I think baseball is certainly conscious of that. And yet, from a numbers game, it's still very challenging to be in that top chair, whether you own a team or whether you're running a team as a manager on the field. And still a lot of effort has been put into it, and trying to figure out not only the effort, but working smart and finding the best ways to be successful in making sure that everyone is represented on and off the field. And so I think there's been a lot of gains in a lot of ways, and there's still a lot of work to do in terms of advancement and true representation. But I see that as a positive in that, when you're making the effort to recognize that you want this game to be reflective of everyone, then you aren't satisfied. You want to continue to move forward in ways to allow the game to be seen from more perspectives. And I think that there's no question that when I was playing, there was probably a very similar percentage of Black players on the field as players, and it can be cyclical, but right now we're kind of in the same space, maybe even a smaller percentage, and that could be the way it is for the time, but most importantly, as long as you have a seat at the table in the leadership, then you get the diversity of thought to go with just diversity of walks of life. You get the different ways to approach problems. And I do think that just expands the game, and hopefully they continue to make that effort.
I think my last question would be, what would be your advice to African-American kids who are not only trying to break into baseball, whether it is from a playing standpoint or a scouting standpoint or a broadcasting standpoint, but just in general as they get into adulthood? What is your piece of advice to them to help, further Black History Month and try to, spread awareness and also, you said, increase participation?
Well, there's no question that when you have the representation and you feel like you'll have a voice in these different positions, it's more encouraging to young people to look and say, okay, there's a place for me. And that's why it's important. And of course, the people in baseball who do come from so many places can relate to so many different kinds of people. That's something I enjoyed a lot about playing baseball, is that I got to meet people from all over the world, and I had a chance to forge teammates out of them. And I think that feeling like a teammate with someone that you might have very different experiences, and yet you still prioritize the goal of winning and coming together, is such a great lesson. It's a great lesson for sport. It's a great lesson that sports tries to come up with rules that are fair and equitable for everyone. I think those are good lessons and good examples to set for larger society. And so, I encourage players that you can be part of that. And when you feel like you can shape the game as well as not just play it, I think that's always encouraging, and people will rise to the occasion and to the challenge. And that's why it's so important that the game remain with open arms, even if it's not hitting the representation numbers it expects or wants, but that you're willing to listen and welcome everyone to this opportunity to share this great game. And I think when you feel that way, that's something I would say to young players. Like, there may be ebbs and flows about what the percentage of Black players are in leadership, but you can feel that commitment, and even when it's not there, you're able to challenge it. You're able to, get in there and make a difference. And sometimes you have a Jackie Robinson, one player, and that can be that consequential to not just baseball, but to the world. And when you come from that legacy, then you believe you can change anything. And there's no reason why baseball can't be that opportunity. So I hope to see continually diverse faces in this game, because that means the game's reaching everyone. And that means the game has a greater chance to sustain itself in so many different areas, because all these people from different perspectives are invested in it. And that comes with really representation.